Hey, everybody. Welcome to Week 5 Power Rankings show. David Goss and Matt Doyle with you for this one. We'll get our real start going in just a minute. Doyle, I am honored to be brought in to really, a gift from the deities. The power rankings are so powerful and they have so much value. And I get burned every week for what you guys do with them. So I'm honored to actually be a part of it this week. We've got our top 10. Philly stays at number 1. Columbus dropping down from 9 to 10. A few new teams sneaking in. Give me your general reactions on seeing the list that we have for this week as we sort of get settled in here.
I mean, NYCFC dropping out of the top 10. That one felt kind of big, and it certainly kind of earned. Though, maybe if that call had gone a different way in the first half, they'd still be in there. Probably would still be in there. What else? Dallas sneaking in at number 9. Chicago at number 8. Two teams that have been very good defensively. Colorado at 7. I think we're showing the Rapids a lot of faith because Colorado's had two pretty disappointing weeks in a row, or two disappointing results in a row, I should say. And the rest of it, I think everybody could probably name the top 6 off the top of their heads, just based upon form this year and sort of like expectations. And that includes, Philly still in 1, LAFC atop the Supporter Shield, number 2 in the power rankings. No surprises, I don't think, in this top 10, right?
I would agree with you. The range to which people can drop up and down is interesting to me, just because of the way the human mind works. But I agree with you on that one. We've got a loaded show coming up. We've got a ton of guests joining us from around the league to talk about a bunch of different teams. We went creative here. We went full abstract art. So we're throwing the paint against the wall, and we are going to have a range of teams. Was that a very good Weeby-ism there?
It was. I mean, you didn't draw it out long enough. But what David is trying to say is that the usual format that Weeby and I have been doing is we just go through the top 10 teams, but that ended up feeling kind of repetitive. And so we're testing a new format that is probably going to be the long-term format, which is we just select 10 teams from around the league. It's a way to get in the weeds on a few more different teams than we usually do. It's a way to get perspective of different journalists, different folks who follow the team around the league or follow teams around the league, new voices, which is important for this show because power rankings are 1 through 28. They're not just 1 through 10, even though sometimes, by the end of the year, it might feel like it. So Gasman is filling in for Weeby, and let's launch this thing.
Doyle, a man of the people. I love that. This is a show for every person, both big and small. All right, Phil, I'm going to give you your clean cut now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Week 5 MLS Power Rankings show. I am David Goss filling in for Andrew Weeby, and alongside me, of course, is Matt Doyle. We have a ton of guests coming up. We're going to dive in deep on the Philly Union with an incredible guest, Atlanta United, FC Cincinnati, and Montreal, and discuss, of course, 10 other teams as we go through the standings. Doyle, I'm excited to step in for Andrew Weeby as Pinocchio, growing into my true self and following what is my mentor and my main host dream in Andrew Weeby. Was that a long enough fake metaphor to be a Weebyism and start me on the right foot?
No, that was just a mess. You need to go back to the drawing board on that one, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Matt Doyle, Week 5 action in MLS, a loaded weekend, a ton of games on Saturday. And then, of course, the Portland Timbers hosting the LA Galaxy in an incredible game on Sunday. We welcome the Chicago Fire and FC Dallas to the top 10 for the first time this season. And they faced off in the opening game of the weekend, actually, against each other. And we'll talk about those two teams as we go along, and some teams dropping out. NYCFC dropped 8 spots down to 11th. RSL, the team we'll talk about coming up in a little bit, dropping down 5 spots, and Minnesota dropping down 4 spots as well. Doyle, what do you make of those big moves?
I mean, the NYCFC one is the big one because we all thought that this was going to be one of the best teams in the league this year based upon not only the fact that they won MLS Cup last season, but they were really good throughout the year. Like even when they weren't getting results, they were still really good. Well, right now they're not getting results, and they haven't been really good. They've struggled. Like so, like they haven't been tragic, but like you don't watch them and think like, oh damn, this team is going to win something. Um, I think we all kind of expected that once they got through the first part of the season and got the 2 weeks off for the international break, they would come out on the other side of it and look refreshed and revitalized and ready to go, especially because they have, the biggest, well, I guess second biggest game in club history tomorrow night. But they didn't look like that
Mhm.
against Toronto this weekend. So if you don't look like that at a month and a half into the season, it's getting to the point where you are what your record says you are. And NYCFC's record and the eye test and the performance says they're not a top 10 team.
Interesting stuff. Obviously, huge CCL game coming up, but let's turn our focus to the best team, unarguably so far to start in MLS play, the Philadelphia Union. They were first last week. They are first once again this week. And to talk a little more about them, let's bring in Meg Swanick. She covers the U.S. national team. She covers the Philadelphia Union as well. Meg, thanks so much for joining us. So you look at the Philadelphia Union so far this season, sitting in first place. Is it fair? Is it safe to say that they are the Supporters' Shield favorites?
I think it's safe to say that. I think reservedly, Philadelphia fans have a lot to be excited for. I will say that over the next 2 months, and this is something Jim Curtin has said as well, consistently, reserved in his press conferences, that we have a lot of big tests coming up over the next 2 months. I think that the team that we've got on our hands looks like potentially the most well-rounded and balanced team Philadelphia has had, maybe even ever. But I do think that we haven't looked as challenged as we might be over the next 2 months. So I think we've got a lot to see, but reservedly, I think we are among the favorites, if not the favorite.
I'm going to let the Julian Carranza question wait for Doyle here, but I want to start with my guy, with Daniel Gazdag. And he felt like the big signing last year. I think he played well at times, but what have you seen from him this year that maybe brings Philly to that next level?
Yeah, I think last year he did well at times. Like you said, he was a bit inconsistent. He might have been a little bit out of position. I think it's a few things could be happening here. One, it could be that second year, getting his groove, getting his feel for the the system that Jim Curtin wants to play, which is very specific. Philly's got a very specific identity that they want to put out on the field. So getting the rhythm for that, getting familiar and adjusted into that. And then I also think that, Jamiro Montero leaving left a space that he filled maybe even better than Jamiro had, who's a very talented player, as we all know. But he really seems to be coming into his own at the top of that diamond. I think that he looks fierce. I think he's about to have an incredible season. And I think it's a mix of things. I think it's getting familiar with the system. I think it's that second year bump. And I think it's having him in a position where he's really going to excel.
Meg, so I'm going to ask the Julian Carranza question now, and I'm going to frame it in a way where it's not just Julian Carranza. It's the center forward rotation between Carranza, Santos, Corey Burke, and Michael Ura. There are 4 options for Jim Curtin to use. Because of injuries, we really haven't seen Michael Ura yet. Carranza seems to have solidified a starting role. That said, this goal he scored this past weekend was his first of the season. He was never a particularly high scorer at all for Inter Miami. What is going right with him so far? What is going wrong? And what does the future pairing up top for this Philadelphia Union team look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one thing that really needs to be said and, driven home is that I think Jim Curtin and Philadelphia in general are really good at player management. And it's possible that he is getting the support or the coaching that he needs in Philadelphia more than he had in Miami. I think he's doing really well so far this season, but I think that very much the strikers that will get the start is a little bit up in the air. You're right that Mikhail Orr is he was late coming in. He's been injured. He looks good to go now, but he's not. I think that potentially he could be in a starting spot, but that remains to be seen. It sounds to me, though, like Jim intends to play all four of them, potentially using them as competition to improve one another. Who starts is up in the air, but I think he intends to start two and then rotate the other two, whoever that is, at the end of the game, last 30 minutes, and then capitalize on a team that's been tired out by the way that Philadelphia plays, and really use all four of those talents up front, which is a problem that's good to have for a team that's kind of struggled in that position in the past.
Meg, I want to close you out on this one, which is Philly won a Supporters Shield. They went to an Eastern Conference Finals last year. Sort of what is the fan base, what is the market expecting from them, and maybe what does this year have to be a success for the Philadelphia Union?
Yeah, I mean, the MLS Cup is next, and that's something that Jim is saying as well. I don't want to sound overconfident on behalf of the team, but I think they look like they have the potential to get there this year. I think that going back to 2017, this is a team that has been consistently building on the last team, doing a little bit better, putting another notch in the belt year on year on year. And so that looks like the next notch in the belt. There's nowhere else to go but to the MLS Cup final. I think they have the potential. I think that's the goal. I think they could get there. I think they could get there and have the Supporters Shield. Obviously, a lot remains to be seen. And then in terms of the market, it's we've been around slightly more than 10 years, which is a relatively new team to a really passionate sports city in Philadelphia. But I think it's really getting on the market. People who cover the Union really want it to be seen as a 5-for-5 city instead of a 4-for-4 in terms of what teams everyone is supporting. And I think that we're getting there. I think it's a team that really, it's emblematic of the city of Philadelphia. It plays and has an ethos of the city of Philadelphia. It matches the kind of heart and interest of this passionate sports city that Philly is. So I think that alongside of getting to the MLS Cup final on a success standpoint, I also think that there's a lot of growth in the market of who's watching, and I think that they're doing a lot of work to get there.
Yeah, I could not believe the atmosphere last year for the playoffs, and I'm looking forward to it as we go through this year, as it feels like Philly's going to have a lot of regular season games that will be championship-like games if they're going to make a run at the Supporters Shield. Meg Swanek, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Follow her on Twitter if you don't, covering all things soccer from national team down to the club level. We really appreciate you taking the time. So, Doyle, that's Philadelphia Union at number one. As we said, no changes, but the next two teams we're going to talk about are big changes. We're going to go down to 8th place in the power rankings for the Chicago Fire. Previously, they were 13th, so moving up 5 spots. Doyle, let's start good before we get into the nervous and bad when we talk about the Chicago Fire. And let's talk about the best defensive team in the league that last year had huge issues. And to me, that shows a team that could potentially cover for losses in the attack and still be able to get points as they did this week without Chihos.
Yeah, Chihos and eventually Xherdan Shaqiri, right? I think the ability to just stay compact and be super aware in transition moments. If you're watching the highlights on YouTube, you're seeing a bunch of this. Like anytime Dallas was stringing passes together, showing maybe slight ability to go vertical. Chicago was able to just as one sort of drop their lines. The right person's getting pressure to the ball. The other midfielders are keeping outlets in their cover shadows. It looks so well drilled, and it produces games like this one, which was frankly pretty freaking boring, man. Like I did not have a whole lot of fun watching this game, but if you're the type of sicko that just likes watching well-drilled defensive teams, you'll like the Chicago Fire. And of course, on top of that, they have in Gaga Slonina, one of the best shot stoppers in the league. And Slonina, like he's deservedly getting a ton of press and a ton of praise. He is still 17 years old, and he is by far the most accomplished teenage goalkeeper in MLS history at this point. Like, think about that. The league is almost 30 years old. It's had guys like Tim Howard, Bill Hamid, Nick Raimondo came into the league when they were teenagers. It's Slonina, Zach Steffen, David Ochoa. Like, Slonina by a mile is the most accomplished teenage goalkeeper, and he's still literally a child. He's still 16 or 17 years old. So he could put out a lot of fires. His distribution still needs work, right? Like, he's not a finished product yet by any stretch of the imagination, but my God, he's really good. So in those few instances where Chicago have got caught out, he's come to the rescue. And that's how you go 5 games and only give up 1 goal. Do we want to talk about the attack? Do you have anything to say about Chicago's attack, David?
So I want to ask you one question first, and then we could get into it. A player we talked about a lot a year and a half ago was Mauricio Pineda. Mm-hmm. It seemed that he'd settled at the pro level at center back. Ezra Hendrickson was specific this offseason, saying he's a center mid. Schihos is out. He comes back and plays center back after starting every game at center mid. Where do you stand on him, both his pro prospects and how he fits into this Chicago team?
I mean, he's clearly a foundational piece of this team. Whether it's starting as a defensive midfielder, which surprised me because they have Federico Navarro, a 21-year-old Argentine. They signed him with a young money spot. He's a U22. And I thought he was really good down the stretch last year. So I thought he would have started at D-mid, but Pineda beat him out. And then this past week, when, again, needed somebody to fill in for Schihos, Pineda was able to come out and put together a really solid, or even slightly beyond solid, 90-minute shift as a center back. And I think this is kind of his sweet spot. He's not going to get a lot of notice at whichever position, but he's going to play good soccer at either of them. And every team that is competing for trophies needs a guy like that. And Chicago finally got one, and it's really nice to see that it came from their homegrown program.
It's like a more defensive based Christian Roldan, right? Of like a flexible dude who, well, you can't tell me today he needs to start at this spot, but he's going to be in the starting lineup for big games. And I agree with you. It is exciting to see Chicago finally tap into that homegrown player pool. In the attack, Shaqiri comes out at halftime. They're saying it was sort of precautionary hamstring tightness. He did travel over to Europe to play for Switzerland and came back. The attack is not there yet. In my mind, it won't be there till Jairo Torres gets there. And it's this weird waiting game. And I think Shaqiri has been as good as he needs to be in year one, coming to a new league, playing as the central force for a team for the first time since Stoke City. But there's only so much that guy can get out of Ivancic and Fabian Herbers. And I don't mean to disrespect Fabian Herbers, because he's had a good career out of Creighton, and I think he's a worthwhile piece having on a roster. But you just look how left side heavy Shaqiri is when he plays, and that shows the value he sees in Herbers over Ivancic. And I think when you bring Torres in and you give him weapons on both sides to play off of, connect with, Torres dropping deep, him making runs, deep and through the lines, all of that, I think it'll be enough to be a competitive playoff team this year. I just think they got to wait.
Yeah, I think that's probably correct. And they're not going to have to wait long. I think Torres is coming in early May.
Yeah.
Right. He's not waiting for the summer window, which is good. But I still feel like this team needs one more piece on top of that, because Torres is not the type of winger who's going to stretch the field and get behind the defense and open things up. Right. He likes to come inside and play. He's more of a playmaker. Mm-hmm. So I think there is one more, they need a Jordan Morris style winger, someone who can, use speed to frighten the defense, pull defenders away from Kasper Shabilko and Xherdan Shaqiri. So it's a work in progress, much more so than the defense, which, we just talked 5 minutes about the defense of the team that's, given up 1 goal in 5 games this year. They deserve that 5 minutes of time.
It's almost as big an impact as if Ezra Hendrickson had been signed to play for this team. That's how much better they've been defensively. Congrats to Ezra, I think, so far in what's been a really great first season. And I think getting Chicago back where they should be as a franchise in this league and as a factor in their market. Let's go one more place down to the team they faced off against. this weekend, and that is FC Dallas, previously 12th in the power rankings, now at 9th, entering the power rankings top 10 for the first time this season. Doyle, it's well deserved. When you look at the league in general right now, I think you've got Philly and LAFC who are sort of riding high. As I look through MVP early voting, what teams I want to watch for an entertainment point of view, Dallas is coming up on a lot of the top of these lists.
They deserve to. And it's funny because we just spent so much time talking about and praising the Fire, which is deserved. And what the Fire did was just simplify, right? Ezra went to a 4-2-3-1. They're super compact, especially in transition moments. They're hyper aware. Nico Estevez went in kind of the other direction with FC Dallas. Like, they're going to a 4-3-3 single pivot. A lot of their defensive success has come from their ability to hold the ball, and like it's a much more intricate, sort of egalitarian form of possession and attack. They come further upfield than most teams in the league. I wanted to get Buzz Carrick from Third Degree on the absolute legend. I wanted to get him on the show to talk a little bit about this because he had a great article maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, breaking down how so much of what's going right for for Dallas, has to do with the positioning of the defensive midfield. And this one, it was Quignon. I think, for the most games, it'll be Edwin Cerrillo, who's been so good through a month this season. And like Estevez specifically has talked about how last year Dallas's defensive midfielders were too flat. They ended up just dropping too deep in front of the back line to just purely protect instead of actually going upfield and playing a little bit. And so what we're seeing, and part of the reason Dallas are so much fun to watch, even when they're getting strangled, to a scoreless draw by Chicago, is that they're out there, trying to push with the ball, trying to make teams react to them, and build chances and dominate games that way. And when it's clicked, they're like top 5 team in the league to watch. This week it didn't click, but I think we could, like, Paul Arriola missed this week. He's probably going to miss a couple more weeks of an injury he picked up with the national team. Jesus Ferreira only played in the second half, and like Frank O'Hara, frankly, is not, that's not much of a replacement. So it didn't look great this week, but there are mitigating factors with that. Now, at whether Dallas can end up at the top of the stand or near the top of the standings by season's end, obviously they're going to need guys like Arriola and Ferreira and Alan Velasco to come through as well. But they're also going to need their depth pieces to deliver, because you don't collect 60 points, and a couple of home playoff games if you don't have, 1 through 25 able to come in and do a job. And that's still that is still a major question for this team.
It is, but I think, one, the fact that Nkose Tafari hasn't played yet this year because Matt Hedges is healthy is huge in terms of you'll get good minutes from him, but maybe you don't want to start him 22 games. Marco Farfan getting younger, Nanu getting more experience. It feels like there is more depth. And what I love about the 3 teams we've talked about so far is they've all built their rosters in multiple ways, but they are using the academy and homegrowns to fill in behind quality, right? It's not just homegrowns to sell or homegrowns only and bust, which Dallas has been in the past. Now it's Paul Arriola and Velasco and Quignon on top of those homegrown pieces. And it's been really fun to watch. I'm going to pull a Weeby here and go big picture for 1 second and say, next week I'm going down to GA Cup, and I think we're going to sit down with Andres Zanota and talk to him a little bit about selling and that process, because they've hit big. They hit big, obviously, on Pepe and Reynolds and all that. I'm interested to know how a guy like him looks at a Cerrillo and Servania. Are they just stabilizing pieces that are part of your club for 12 years? Or is that a situation where you look at a kid that plays and say, what can we sell him for? And how does his career end up working? And I think that's a different level than a Brian Reynolds or Ricardo Pepe and maybe, hopefully, a Paxton Pomykal one day. So FC Dallas coming in at 9th place on our list. And now let's drop down a few more spots to 12th place. And we've got J. Sam Jones in the chat right now. Come on in. I sent you a request to talk here, as Atlanta United, previously 18th, moving up to 12th place. But Matt Doyle, I think the big stuff we wanted to talk about, Sam, whenever you're ready to come in, we'd like to talk about it with you. The big stuff we wanted to talk about was the injury news coming out of this game. Ozzie Alonso tearing his ACL. It sounds like he will be out for the season. Matteo Rossetto, an injury as well, 2 to 4 weeks, it sounds like, at a minimum for him. Those were the two starting mids for Atlanta this weekend in DC. And then Joseph Martinez headed to Pittsburgh to sort of get another look at that knee that he's been coming back from now for over the last 2 years. And you have to say a little bit of a worrying time right now for Atlanta United.
A lot of a worrying time. I mean, the Ozzy news on its own is devastating because he'd been one of the best players on this team through the first month, even though he's 36. He still looking like one of the best players on this team, and doing your ACL at 36 years old. I mean, I hope it's not it. I hope this isn't the end of Ozzy, but like, I don't think anybody would be entirely surprised if he was never able to come back from because it's a devastating injury. And it's at any age. At 36, it feels like a career ender. But the Joseph thing is the bigger worry because Joseph, I wrote about it in my column on Sunday. Like he does not move. Like it's not just he doesn't move like he used to. He doesn't move like a typical starting center forward in this league. He makes the few attacking runs into the 18 of any starting forward in MLS other than Jesus Ferreira, who of course is a false nine. Ferreira specifically comes back into the play to be a playmaker. That's not Joseph's bag, man. And he was so static, and I was not surprised that there was something medically wrong with him. Sam, what are you? First of all, what is your DEFCON level with all of this, and what are you hearing?
It's about a 5. 5 is the higher one, right? Or is it 1?
Yeah, I think mathematically, it's higher, but I think in terms of worry, DEFCON 1 is actually the highest.
Yeah, so it's at a 1.
Yeah.
It's at a 1. I can't remember a bleaker press release coming out at any point for this team. I described it this morning in the newsletter I do for the mothership as like a child telling a scary story. And then Mateus Isetu was out for 2 to 4 weeks, and then Ozzie Alonso tore his ACL, and then Joseph is going to Pittsburgh for a knee examination. Just the fact that they mentioned it at all has me worried. It seems like a soft launch for bad news, right? Just to prepare everyone for what they might find once he gets this knee re-examined.
Is there? Let me ask this, David. In the past, because it's been 2 years now since his ACL tear, he's had multiple surgeries. He's had multiple check-ins with specialists. In the past, when that's happened, have they announced that ahead of time, or is it only in retrospect? Because you're right, it is a little weird that part of the press release with this other devastating news was like, oh, and Joseph's going to get his knee checked out.
Yeah, no, they haven't. They haven't. Joseph is actually the one who revealed in a press conference exactly the extent to which he was struggling. I mean, this was to the point where he was genuinely considering retirement. The last time all this went down, I think he had to go in 3 or 4 times, from my understanding, to get everything kind of cleaned up. And he said he stopped for a moment and really considered not even coming back. To have another complication like this come up, and Matt, you touched on it, he's just not moving. Even if you look at the eye test, if you look at the numbers, he wasn't making runs in the box. We looked at a statistic called runs challenging the back line to try and dig into that a little more and hope for something a little more optimistic. It didn't look that good. He's been static the entire time, and now that he's going to get something checked on, it really is worrying.
There's no replacement for Joseph Martinez, obviously, and especially when you look in a salary cap league, that's a huge asset that's not available to you. But you have talent on this roster. You have other pieces in Thiago Almada, in Marcelo Moreno, Arujo is out as well. Who does this all fall on now, and how does Pineda get this team at a high level, even if Joseph's not around?
In particular, I think you look at the midfield at that point. You would love to see Atlanta United control games in a way they really haven't over the past 2, maybe even 3 years at this point in midfield. And without Ozzy, that gets a lot more difficult and puts a lot more of the onus on Santiago Sosa, on guys like Franco Barra, who gas theorem have to make that year 2 jump, right? I know you like that. So we're looking for them to step up and be guys who can not only win the ball. We know Franco Barra can win the ball, but can he be effective when he's on the ball? Can he move into spaces? Can he be a steadying presence in the way that Ozzy was, right? For Santi, he's coming off a year where he looked a step slow pretty consistently. Once teams kind of figured him out and figured out that he was going to play these long diagonal balls and decided to really kind of man mark him out of games, he struggled a lot. And then we found out later he had to go in and get sports hernia surgery, right? So he's been struggling, and I don't know how he's going to do in this really now critical role now that Ozzy's out.
Oof. Yeah, not a lot of good news so far this season for Atlanta United. Let's try to end it on something that might be good news. Give us your take on Thiago Almada so far.
I think we've been talking about you, Matt. We've been talking about you. We looked at the comparison to Ezekiel Barco 2.0, and I think to some extent that's correct. I think they profile somewhat similar, but I think where Thiago differs is his just a willingness to try literally anything, right? Ezekiel always seems so scared to make any choice whatsoever at any point, and Thiago seems assured in what he's doing, even if it's maybe not the best idea all the time. He's at least trying to create, trying to be progressive, trying to send the ball into spaces that can make effective things happen. Now, is that worth $16 million? I don't know yet. I'm not super confident in that. I'm interested to see if maybe he's an option as a false 9 for Atlanta United moving forward. My understanding is that he did a little bit of that at Vélez Sarsfield. So he may take on an expanded role here too, and we'll see how he does.
Sam, what's the last thing you spent $16 million on?
Say that again?
What's the last thing you spent $16 million on?
World Series merch and National Championship merch. I'm bankrupt. Someone please
Get out of here. Get him out of here, David. Get him out of here.
Sam, I do have to ask you one last question. What's your DEFCON level of me going full Picasso on your power rankings and just being all across the board in the wrong order, everything? How do you feel?
I feel totally okay that the power rankings are inherently flawed in the first place.
All right, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Appreciate that. And as he mentioned, he's got the mailbag coming out every single day from MLSsoccer.com. He is the Lord, the architect behind the power rankings. I didn't know if I was going to go Matrix or Loki, and then I kind of got stuck in between. So I just said a thing. That's Atlanta United in 12th place. One more spot past them is RSL, who drop 5 spots to 13th place off the back of this weekend, which was, Doyle, a 1-1 draw at Colorado in the Rocky Mountain Cup. And I think with RSL, the conversation still has to be the amount of quality that's missing from this team week in and week out. And I'm a little surprised. This was probably the biggest surprise to me of the drops.
Well, bear in mind that there was no power rankings last week, and RSL had played last weekend, and they lost to a Sporting Kansas City team that we were all pretty down on. So it's not just this very good point that they put together against Colorado. There is the other game in there because they did play through the international break. But look, this team, Pablo's got them playing with great energy no matter who they put out there. In this game, I think they maybe had 3 first choice 11 guys. There's no Justin Glad, there's no David Ochoa, there's no Aaron Herrera, there's missing pieces in midfield. Damir Kreilach is still not back.
Bobby Wood.
I think they're missing one of their wingers as well. Like it's absurd the amount of injuries they have had to deal with. And Justin Miram very cleverly was able to earn a penalty kick on one of their few four-ways into the attack. And Ruiz potted it, and then they held on for dear life and got themselves a point. And like right now, this part of the season, there is nothing wrong with that. But I think, like, you've seen RSL this year, man. Like, you cannot continue to play like this. Like, if you continue to play like this and ask your goalkeeper to be superhuman every week, you're not going to end up on 55 points in a playoff spot. You are going to be scraping to get in on like 46, 47 points. But like the thing with RSL is like they do that every year. So it's kind of familiar for them.
We're here for RSL. Pablo looked pretty comfortable walking into Colorado as the head coach of RSL. I didn't like that. I thought he should have looked more vexed throughout the whole experience. But credit to RSL. And then I think for Colorado, they came out on fire in the second half, and they put RSL under pressure. Damir Kreilach did come back during the second half. He came off the bench. That's really good news for this RSL team. Doyle, I do think, though, over the course of the year, you talk about maybe not being sustainable. But what does seem sustainable is the next man up, that situation that they've built. They built it last year when Rusnak was out and they made the playoff run.
Yeah.
There does seem to be just a pure belief that when someone goes out, the next player is getting an opportunity, and they play with a level of confidence that only Tate Schmidt could bring to a team. And he has brought it in droves throughout this season. And it's been really fun to watch. So RSL dropping down, as Doyle kind of brought me inside. True power rankings insider baseball on this one. So I appreciate
David,
that,
you have a vote. You have as much say in the power rankings as I do.
I voted, and I'm pretty sure I put RSL down here to some extent. I will tell you this. I started this week's normally I start from the top down, and I started this week from the bottom up, which I feel like, and we'll get into some of those teams towards the end. I feel like we are starting to reach the point where teams that haven't performed, and I'm starting to feel confident about who they are. But before we get into that, let's talk about a team that we've asked a lot of questions about, which is Austin FC, down to 16th place, one down from 15th place. They played San Jose this weekend. Doyle, the big question 2 weeks in was, is this for real? Then they get a decent result at Portland. They, you could say, struggle at home against Seattle, and then go to San Jose. They go up 2-0, and then they tie 2-2 in this game. Do you feel like you know who Austin FC is now compared to a few weeks ago?
Yeah, I think I do. And I think they are kind of what we expected them to be, right? Like clearly better than last year in a lot of ways. I think they're a little less naive with their shape. They have, look, I've never been a Maxi Urruti fan, but he is significantly better than anything they were able to trot out at center forward last year, which is, that's an upgrade. They're not as good using the ball as they need to be if they're going to play this shape in this style, right? Because they're trying to come upfield. They're trying to look, Josh Wolf coached under Greg Berhalter for a long time, and for both Columbus and the U.S. national team. And so we know what kind of soccer he wants his team to play. And they showed a bunch of that against this Quakes team. But in so doing, they generated chances that they didn't finish, and they left themselves exposed to chances that, if they were better at this, they wouldn't have left themselves exposed to. And that's how a point on the road is a very credible result. I still think that for Austin, this has to feel more like 2 points dropped, because they had San Jose's number. They should have come out of this with 3 points. But when you look at the makeup of the roster, it can't be considered much of a surprise that they didn't.
Yeah, I agree with you. We saw this happen to Columbus as well. So maybe this is who San Jose is when they're down, backs against the wall, they're just insane. And that's where they that's where they thrive. But I agree with you about Austin.
Give the people your Dominguez take.
I wasn't a fan of him when he was at Club America. I didn't watch a ton of him down in Paraguay, I'll admit. I don't think he's a high-level player. Like, you're talking about it. Let's take the DP tag off of it. If he was on Chicago, I would still, I think, be talking about Jairo Torres coming in and improving that team on the wing. I don't think he's I don't think he's a legit goal scorer. I don't think you're getting 10 or 12 plus from him. I don't think he's finishing a ton of chances that aren't straightforward for him. I don't think he's a 1v1 threat, which really closes the space you talked about for Druisi and Ring to sort of operate in zone 14 and start to pull pieces around. And I think the toughest part about him has been that he's not a guy when the game's against you that has sort of stepped up and given you big performances. He has wilted in those moments. And so it doesn't help me that he needs Druisi to be great for him to be good. I need a guy who can take the load off other players in that spot. And in this league, I mentioned it with Joseph, it's a salary cap league. You can't afford at prospect or, assets that you put investment into to not perform for you and still get really high level performances. I think Fagundes has been a great pickup. I like the addition of Ethan Finley. He gives a little bit of a different look, verticality. They look for him really quickly when they win the ball back, when he's out on the right side. But I think Dominguez is more of a worry to me than the center forward position going forward for them. And it'll be interesting to see how they get out of it, if that's what they do choose to do. So Austin FC dropping down a spot there. Let's move to Orlando City, who doesn't move after a home loss to LAFC. As Doyle mentioned, this is sort of a weird combo week, and Orlando City had a good performance last weekend over on the West Coast. Actually, a pretty nice historic trip for them over on the West Coast. Doyle, we got to see. We have to talk about the defense. We have to talk about the injury to Antonio Carlos. But before we get there, I want to talk fun, which is we got to see Cara start with Facundo Torres and Pato alongside Pereira. I think the first time all four of those have been in the starting lineup together. What did you make of what you saw from it?
And they were much better going forward than they have been virtually at any point this season. And that's not super surprising given how Oscar Pareja's teams usually start, right? Like we've seen this for a decade now from Oscar. The first month of the season, sometimes even 2 months, they play behind the ball. They absorb and counter. They try to get the defense right first, and then they start adding bells and whistles. And usually that's based around a number 10 who could pick locks. But now with I think Facu Torres is really good. So I think more of the creative burden is shifting out wide. And like this was the first week where it looked really good for them in terms of more than just sit and counter. The flip side is they're really struggling to stop anybody. And as much as that foursome in attack puts on the table going forward, they take a lot of it off defensively. If you watch, Cara, Torres, Pato, and especially Pereira, they don't actually add almost anything defensively. So they're really easy to play through, and that instantly scrambles the deep lying midfielders in this 4-2-3-1, right? Like Junior Urso, your guy Junior Urso, and whether it's Araujo or Mendez when he's in there, they are asked to put out so many fires and cover so much ground that like it pulls them out of position and forces them to commit to plays that are really tough to make. And the knock-on effect is that was then asking the back line, specifically center backs, to have to do stuff defensively that they weren't necessarily comfortable with. And so you have a team that's been relying on Pedro Gaese to stand on his head. And in this one, he did not.
And now you're adding in Antonio Carlos. The rumor that we're hearing is out for 4 to 6 months with that hamstring injury. Basically the season. He is the premier option on that back line. He's the best defender in that group. And so for Orlando, there's a ton of question marks. Doyle, I agree with you about that front four. I thought we've seen that from Pereira now over his time in MLS. He has regressed at that spot because I thought he was actually very good pressing and being tough to play against as a 10. And then it feels like Oscar Pareja, if Pato's healthy, he wants him on the field. Right. And so he has to figure out a way now to get the defensive support that Juan needs and that this whole team needs with Pato out there on the field. My guess is there's a formation change coming. It's not something we've seen from Oscar Pareja a ton in the past, but it doesn't feel like all these pieces fit together the way it was put out there against LAFC.
I'm skeptical about the formation change, but I guess everything's on the table. For the neutral fans who are listening to this, it should be known that while Schlegel is the likely replacement for Antonio Carlos, Orlando City have a really highly regarded homegrown center back in Tommy Williams, guy who 17 years old, came up through their homegrown system. He's played with the US U17s. Remind me, David, have you seen him in the past at GA Cup? You have a take on this kid?
Yeah, I saw him at MLS Next last year, and I talked to their coaches a lot about him. While he does have a good pedigree, he got pretty fast-tracked under Oscar Pareja. Oscar came in, liked what he saw, pulled him into first-team training, and he's one of those players who every time they challenged him, he looked comfortable. And so they just kept pushing him. And it went from, this is a guy who could train with the first team, to last year, I think I got a guarantee early in the season that he was going to appear in the first team. That's how good they feel about him. Skinny, but really tall. And so they're waiting for him to sort of grow into his body there. Really comfortable with the ball going forward, creating, and a pretty good organizer. He's not the loudest player on the field, but he was the organizer for their youth teams that have all won division championships over the last year and a half, and have played. They have now Alex Freeman, who was at the right back next to him, who's a homegrown as well, and a Peruvian youth international who started alongside him at center back. And he was the linchpin to all of that. So I'm pretty excited about him. And I think he could be a factor this year because he can cover ground, and Janssen needs that. So Robin Janssen now, he's the general of that back line. He's the veteran, but he has huge limitations. And I think you need to put him in a spot to be successful, to get the best out of this team. And I think Tommy Williams could be a factor in that. And I'm excited to see what Oscar Pareja does. I've said it a couple times, Doyle. I think Oscar Pareja is a huge part of the success of the U.S. national team because of what he built in Dallas. And I think he's building it again in Orlando. And we're going to be better off as a soccer culture because he's creating another robust academy that has local players that are going to be successful. So Orlando City, 17th, no change for them. Let's go to Montreal, 22nd place, previously 19th. So they moved down 3 spots after the 4-3 win against FC Cincinnati. We're going to have Peter Galindo in now. You can see his work at Sportsnet on MLSsoccer.com as well. Northern Football. He hosts his own podcast. He does great work covering everything Canadian soccer, both national team and at the club level. Peter, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. So we wanted to have you on. We want to dig into Montreal a little bit more. And obviously with CCL, it's been a bit of a hectic start to the year. I'm going to let Doyle go defense on this one. I'm going to start in the attack, though. Talk to me a little bit about Georgi Mihailovic, where you've seen improvement from him, and maybe what the club feels like his future and his ceiling is.
Listen, I've been a big Mihailovic guy, even from the time he, came to Montreal. I thought this is a low-key solid move. Yes, they had to spend quite a bit to get him in, but this year, like the steps he has taken, just in terms of taking over games and just the consistency of doing that, I think has been the biggest difference. And if you just look at some of the metrics he's putting up, he's top 5 in expected assists among midfielders so far this season. He's top 10 in open play expected assists among all players. And yet that isn't even the driving force of what is kind of capturing everybody's attention. It's the goal scoring. It's the late runs into the box. It's the ability to just keep the ball and not get dispossessed, take on defenders and get quality shots away. And the fact that he is essentially replacing the goal scoring for Montreal in the time being, without Kyoto in form, without Kai Kamara starting to get his feet underneath him now. But that just kind of goes to show you, like, if he's playing like this and you can get maybe another forward or two getting involved in the attack the way he is, this could be not just a playoff team, but a decently solid playoff team in the East.
Okay, so you mentioned another forward or two. There's like 97 on this roster. The question is who it'll be. You mentioned Kai getting the start, getting the goal, his goal for his 9th different MLS club in his career. I picked Mason Toye for my Golden Boot team to start the year, which is tough right now. Give me an update on Toye and maybe where this position stands for Montreal.
Like you, Goss, I was very high on Toye.
We're getting burned.
And it does happen. But, in terms of him, like, I think it's just been injuries. And then the fact that when he's kind of hit form, then Montreal's form has kind of declined. Like, it just hasn't really worked out in that regard. Now they've brought in Kai Kamara for some veteran leadership and just a bit more threat in the air, because you look at who their wingbacks are specifically. Yes, okay, Matt Duchouaniere is hurt at the moment, but Alistair Johnston, with Kai Kamara out there, they can really utilize his crossing abilities and just his overall vision. Like, that's one of the most underrated aspects of Johnston's game. So I feel like Kamara might have the slight edge. You could even see him and Kyoto playing together, because as we know, Kyoto kind of likes to drift across the pitch, and then that means Kamara can just occupy the last defender, get on the end of those crosses. But that's how I feel it's kind of going right now. And unfortunately for Toy, because in the spurts of games that he's had, has a decent sample size to his name.
Yeah, I think you saw with Alistair Johnston those early crosses when they won possession looking for Kai in this Cincinnati game. Giving up 4 or 3 goals as well, though, in this one. I want to ask you about this central midfield. Obviously, Ismail Kone, a rising star right now. He's got the spot alongside Wanyama. We haven't seen Piet since the first CCL game, I think, of this season. And Rida Zuhir, sort of pushed out of the team now that Kone's established that spot. What do you see from the balance Kone has with Wanyama, and is it his spot to lose now?
You can't underestimate the influence Wanyama, I think, has had on Kone. Yes, he's a very talented player. He probably had this in him the whole time, but having a player of Wanyama's caliber and pedigree next to him has surely helped him grow in confidence, because you go back to that Atlanta game, or even in the Champions League when he had some pretty rocky starts, and in some cases mistakes that led to goals being conceded for Montreal. He was able to shake it off, turn it around, and in some cases single-handedly win games for Montreal. The well-rounded ability that he has, whether it's covering ground defensively, the vision he has going forward, the dribbling abilities, and the fact that he came through the Montreal Academy as a winger or a number 10, I think really helps him as a number 8, especially with those long strides that he has, because you see the confidence he has on the ball, especially when he's progressing it forward. Yes, he could fine-tune some things like his touch under pressure, even just dealing with teams pressing him. We saw in that Canada-Panama game, he really struggled with Panama's high press. It happened against Cruz Azul at altitude, which you can kind of forgive in that instance. Those would be the areas I'd look at for him. The double pivot in general, it's still a bit of a work in progress, because Wanyama is slowing down a little bit, and Kone especially is still trying to figure out the defensive responsibilities. And that is partially why I think they're conceding some goals in terms of building out from the back, because they have to get their positioning right. And Wilfred Nancy has spoken about this many times. They just have to get used to each other in those situations, because with a little bit of the turnover they've seen back there, plus Kone coming into the team, I think you're probably going to see a few hiccups, although it was better against Cincinnati, I will admit.
That part was better. The back line itself was not better. And Kamal Miller, I think we'd all agree, has hit a little slump after a very good first year. He's had a rough past 6 weeks or so. But it's not just him. Nobody seems to be that settled in the Montreal back line. And then on top of it, Sebastian Breza has had a really rough past few weeks. Are we seeing structural issues with these guys, or are we just seeing like 3 or 4 guys sort of underperforming at the same time?
I feel like it's a mixture of everything, Doyle, to be honest. And Bressa, speaking of getting burned, he was someone I actually tipped to maybe make the Canada squad last month. But then Dane St. Clair got his starting spot back, and as long as St. Clair is starting, he is the bona fide number 3 for Canada. So Bressa kind of got the raw end of the deal in that regard. But since that Atlanta game, there have been questions asked of some of the, not just decisions he's made, but just whether, could he have gotten that? Could he have maybe figured out his technique a little better? For him, I think it's just shaking out of a little bit of bad form for him. And this is his first really, proper go as a starter this year in Montreal. So maybe that just takes a bit of time. I don't know. The rest of the back line, I feel, is a bit of a structural issue. If you look at specifically Miller. There have been two real significant changes from last year compared to this year that I've noticed. First of all, Lapalainen as a left wing back, which I think is hindering not just Lapalainen's threat in the final third, but also leaving Kamal Miller in the lurch a lot. Because Lapalainen is sometimes a little lackadaisical coming back to defend, Miller has all that space to cover, and he's not very quick on the turn. And you're even seeing a lot of times in that Cincinnati game, especially, you would see Acosta kind of drifting to that side, and players making runs close to the touchline to drag out Miller and then open up gaps between him and Camacho. He just has a little bit of uncertainty about him. And then secondary to that, I think he is playing a lot more advanced, and I think that Montreal defense in general is playing a lot higher than they normally are used to. And, really Johnston and maybe Waterman aside, although I still have questions about his pace, they're not the quickest back line, especially when they have to defend in transition. So you put all that together, and I think that's leading to some of the issues. And it's interesting, too, because they're mid-table in expected goals against right now in MLS. So, you feel like if they maybe clean that up a little bit, maybe sit a little deeper at times, they would be able to reduce the amount of goals they can see, because a lot of it is self-inflicted mistakes. And I feel some tactical issues, and yes, also a little bit to do with chemistry, although it is weird because Miller, Camacho, and Waterman are all used to each other. They've played together for, a year and a bit now. So that side of it is maybe a little strange in terms of Nancy picking it out as, well, we got to improve the chemistry when we build from the back.
It feels like maybe you never get used to Rudy Camacho. He's just an experience, and that's something that goes on alongside you. Peter Galindo, one of the best out there covering everything Canada from the national team all the way down, Sportsnet, MLS, Northern football. And of course, we've got a World Cup coming up from the men's side for the first time in a really long time. So a lot of excitement around that. Follow him and his pod for all of that. Peter, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate it. Man, such a friendly goodbye, Doyle. Such a Canadian moment there from Peter. We really appreciate it. Let's keep rolling through our power rankings. We got two more teams to go. Sitting in 25th place. You heard that right. Down 5 spots is Sporting Kansas City, a team that some, and when I say some, I'm talking about one of the two people hosting this show and not Matt Doyle, picked really high in all of their preseason picks and everything like that. SKC gives up, loses to Vancouver for the first time all season. Vancouver gets their first win, and it's not good in Kansas City land unless you're a Jayhawk KU fan. Congratulations to all of them on this day, I guess. Doyle, for SKC, can you give me any layout, formula, playbook to sort of get them out of this and sort of rescue this season?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And off the top here, we should make it clear that they are missing a ton of talent, right? Daniel Shalloy, I should say, and Johnny Russell have both missed time so far this season. Alan Pulido's gone for the season. Their number 10, Gadi Kinda, he hasn't played yet this year, I don't believe. That's for not just starting level attack. That's like 4 attackers who could go double-digit goals and double-digit assists. So they're already starting from a really tough spot. Add into it the fact that defensive midfield is just such a massive question mark for this team. Ori Russell came in penciled in as the starter, but he's not really a starting caliber defensive midfielder in this league. And Remy Voltaire has gotten some minutes there, and he's more of a stopgap guy. So now, okay, your attack is kind of messed up because you're missing, to one degree or another, your 4 most important attackers, and then defensive midfield is a very big question. And add on top of that Graham Zusi seems to be feeling his age. Angelo Fontes, who was very good for most of last year, seems to be feeling his age, and Timilia really seems to be feeling his age. These guys are all in their mid-30s. Roger Espinoza as well. These guys are all in their mid-30s. And it's starting to feel like maybe they hung on a year too long with this group. I don't know what the solution is. We've seen Peter Vermees actually try to play a different formation, which he's done like twice in 12 years as head coach. Like it's always the 4-3-3. And with good reason. This has been, other than the Sounders, this has been the best regular season team in the league for, since 2010. But like that, he played that 5-4-1 and they lost, I think it was 3-1 in Chicago a couple of weeks back. So there's not like it just feels like they got hit with too much bad luck and in terms of injuries and age and guys underperforming all at once. Now it's not. I guess I'm kind of given like the glass not even half full scenario, right? Like it's shown, like it's been shown over more than a decade now that it's pretty stupid to bet against Peter Vermees in the regular season, right? He finds a way to get more out of players and figure stuff out. But like this is the most vulnerable I can remember seeing Sporting Kansas City. Other than that, was it 2019 season when they were very bad? Like other than that season, this is the most vulnerable I can remember them being since Kurt Alpha was the coach. Like that was like 4 presidential administrations ago.
What's a little frustrating to me, and I agree with everything you said, Doyle, the biggest one being you don't really pick against Peter Vermees in a regular season. And what will be interesting, as I sort of mentioned with my going from the back up in the power rankings, is as other teams acknowledge that they're bad, and you often see teams fall off and maybe lack effort at times. Well, that happened to SKC because it's never happened before. No. But what's frustrating to me is the way that Peter Vermees has gone about covering for those aging players is Ben Sweat and Uri Rosell. And so it feels like he's doubling down. And outside of Daniel Shalhoub, no player since the Beasler, Zusi, Roger Espinoza draft, he has not gotten more out of young players. It's always been experienced players, but he's also touted how many homegrowns they've signed and how much they've invested in their academy. And it, as I said, with the first 3 teams, that to me is the gap, which is, okay, Roger Espinoza is not an every game player anymore. Where is your Jack McGlynn?
Right.
Where is your Edwin Cerrillo to fill in on top of the A, experienced players you've had, and B, the big signings you've made? That in Pulido, nothing you can do about it. He's not available. Johnny Russell as well at times. So worrying time for SKC. I think a really interesting season coming forward. We will talk a lot about them as we go along the season. And we now find ourselves on our last team. So now an opportunity to talk about FC Cincinnati, currently in 26th. Previously, we're in 23rd place. And from Queen City Press, we're going to have Laurel Failer on here to talk a little bit about them. Laurel, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys inviting me to come on.
So, so let's start with Superman himself. Let's start on the high, which is the great hope for the USMNT, Brandon Vasquez, who gets a goal. The own goal that Montreal scored was the first goal this season he did not have a hand in as an assist or goal, and he literally created the own goal. That's how dangerous he's been. Take us inside a little bit on maybe what's changed in him, what you've seen from him, and him under Pat Noonan.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really say anything has necessarily changed for him this year. I think we really saw it start at the end of last year. And really, you can say he had opportunities in the past, but it was coming off the bench. He never really got in a rhythm in those situations. He had some missed opportunities that you could point to, and it looked like, oh man, he's just, what's he doing out there? But once he started getting into the starting role at the end of last year, when Chris Albright came in, they made the change with Jaap Stam. They started playing a different system where he and Brenner were playing up top together, and that looked really good at the end of last year. He started putting some of those opportunities in the back of the net, and he's really done well carrying that momentum into this year. I think he's just really thriving now that he's actually getting a chance to play the way he wants to, play in a system that really benefits him. and he also apparently is really thriving on just he eats these Kodiak cakes apparently. So that is
Love it.
he's attributed his success to the pancakes. So
It's such a simple game sometimes. We overcomplicate it with data and stats. It's about human spirit and pancakes, and that's all that matters. I'm glad there is that positive to talk about with FC Cincinnati. It's a bit new, but let's go to the 4 goals conceded against Montreal, to the back line. And I'm curious, one of the things that stuck out to me last week, which sort of got lost in the shuffle of World Cup qualifying, is the trade of Gustavo Vallecilla, who was supposed to be the new young option at center back that could cover ground and play alongside Jeff Cameron. What happened that they decided he wasn't, and sort of explain to me a little bit this trade and what Chris Albright's now trying to build along that back line?
I think there was a lot that went into that. I can say myself, I was just stunned that he was the one that they moved. Like you mentioned, he's a young center back. Right now, their back line is a little bit on the older end and not as fast. He's a fast center back that has size. He seems like the ideal kind of player you would want to develop. And he had injuries in the preseason that came up. Hadn't played a game. He occupies an international spot, a senior spot, a U22 spot. So we did get a chance to speak with Chris Albright last week, and hearing him explain the move, it made a lot more sense to me. It seems like he is just positioning himself to make some moves that he's valuing some of the assets that maybe in the past were kind of looked over in this club. So he sees those spots. Also right now, Gustavo's value was up. They were able to get an incredible amount of allocation money from Colorado in that deal. Colorado is paying part of the transfer fee that they were going to have to pay once they purchased his contract from Estiakis. So it makes a little more sense when you talk about all of the things that they got back and all of the assets they've now freed up to do some business, hopefully with the roster coming up before the window closes, or even this summer if they're looking to make some splashy moves in the summer. So the back line is hurting, but he hadn't been a part of it yet. He was a part of 74 goals allowed last year, so you can't really say that he was definitely going to be an answer to the back line. So hopefully there's a plan to improve that back line, especially with Ronald Matarrita out now. That's a big concern for them, and you can just see how different the defense is. Not that Matarrita's the greatest defender. He's an incredible guy going forward. I think he is solid on defense at times, but it just looks so much different when he's in there versus when he's not, and we're seeing that the last couple of games, just the impact of him not being there.
You talked about the Vallecilla move in the context of a potential another big move coming. If that big move comes, do you think it happens on the back line, or do you think it happens in the central defensive midfield? Because since he's been sitting on the allocation order spot for a while now, right? Is there a sense, like Carlos Grezo, who has been mentioned in the past as a guy who could be coming back? Is there a sense that is what Chris Albright is waiting for with that, and that there is going to be reinforcement coming in central defensive midfield?
That's the impression that we've gotten for a while now. I mean, you look at the midfield, and that's always been a concern for FC Cincinnati. It has a lot to do with the problems on the back line as well, when you're just not seeing that connection in the midfield that you'd like. So, I can't say I know Chris Albright's plans with that. It certainly does seem like the focus has been on improving the midfield, and Carlos Gruezo's name has come up on many occasions. It does seem like there's some interest on his part in coming back to MLS. I've heard more in the summer, so maybe that's the holdup. But I'm not sure though. They might need to reevaluate the back line. Maybe that is a bigger concern now with Matarrita out. Some of the struggles we've seen at the center back position the last couple games. They might need to move on that, and maybe that's a bigger priority than they thought. But it did seem like the midfield was kind of the focus.
All right, Laura Failer, thank you so much. Queen City Press. It is worth the money. It's worth following her, of course. I think the best doing it out there covering FC Cincinnati. And this team is interesting. Like, I wanted to talk about FC Cincinnati. I mean, the wins maybe not there week in and week out, but the goals are there, and it's been fun. And Brandon Vasquez is fun, and everything else Laurel's covering has been awesome as well. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, so that takes us to 26th with FC Cincinnati. We have just, gone chaos on the power rankings, but we have now finally come to our close. Let's take a final look at the top 10 of week 5 of the MLS power rankings. Philadelphia staying at number 1, LAFC rising with their big win. NYCFC falling out of the top 10, headed into their CCL semifinal matchup tomorrow night against the Seattle Sounders. Columbus dropping, but the two big movers into the top 10, FC Dallas and the Chicago Fire. I've been David Goss, Matt Doyle here with me for this one. Doyle, any closing thoughts?
No, not really. You have any closing thoughts?
Not really as well. I think congratulations to the Red Bulls. I think those fans have been through quite a lot. They can enjoy a team that's winning.
They've made the playoffs like 12 years in a row.
Doyle, don't you dare question the pain of Red Bull and Metro Stars fans.
Oh my
Even
goodness,
if they win a title, they still have to feel pain. That is the nature of their existence. And with that, thank you so much to all of you for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. If you missed any of the show, it'll be up on MLSsoccer.com and YouTube as well. And have a great day, everyone.